He's a Boy Scout leader and an active member of his church. He also murdered 10 people, including 2 children.
I'm a serial killer, and I live among you. These words weren't from a movie. They were real letters sent to police by a killer who spent 30 years murdering innocent people while leading a Boy Scout troop and going to church every Sunday. A man whose own family had no idea they were living with BTK, one of America's most terrifying serial killers. Wichita, Kansas, a place where neighbors know each other by name, where church bells ring on Sunday mornings, and where evil wore the face of the man next door. For 30 years, this community harbored a predator who would become one of America's most notorious serial killers. Dennis Rader grew up in a seemingly normal household in Wichita during the 1950s and early 1960s. But beneath the surface of this ordinary childhood lay disturbing warning signs that nobody recognized. As the oldest of 4 sons to William and Dorothy Rader, young Dennis displayed behaviors that would later horrify investigators, hanging small animals, developing twisted sexual fantasies, and spying on neighborhood women. The transformation from troubled youth to monster didn't happen overnight. After graduating from Wichita Heights High School in 1963, Rader worked at a local grocery store before enrolling in Wesleyan College. His unremarkable academic performance led him to join the United States Air Force, where he served from 1966 to 1970. During his service in Okinawa, Japan, he maintained a facade of competence and reliability, eventually achieving the rank of sergeant. Upon returning to Wichita, Rader met Paula Dietz, a seemingly perfect match who would become his wife in 1971. They settled into a modest home in Park City, a suburb of Wichita. To everyone around them, they appeared to be the quintessential American couple, hardworking, church-going, and preparing to start a family. But as Rader would later confess during these seemingly peaceful years, his dark fantasies were growing stronger. What nobody knew was that beneath this carefully constructed veneer of normalcy, Rader was meticulously planning his transformation into BTK. His military training had taught him discipline and attention to detail. His subsequent education in electronics and criminal justice would provide him with the tools he needed to both commit his crimes and evade capture for decades. As the 1970s began, Wichita had no idea that one of its own was about to unleash a reign of terror that would span 3 decades and forever change the fabric of this Midwestern community. January 15, 1974, a date that would forever haunt Wichita. The Otero family had no reason to fear the man who appeared at their door that morning. Joseph Otero, his wife Julie, and their children, Joseph Jr. and Josephine, became BTK's first known victims in a crime so brutal it shook the city to its core. The killer had studied them, watched their routines, and chosen his moment carefully. With military precision, he executed a plan that demonstrated both his methodical nature and his sadistic desires. The scene investigators discovered would haunt them for decades. 4 family members systematically murdered, with young Josephine hanged from a pipe in the basement. But BTK wasn't finished. 3 months later, in April 1974, he targeted Catherine Bright. This attack deviated from his pattern when he encountered her brother Kevin, who became the first person to survive an encounter with BTK. Kevin's survival and subsequent testimony provided investigators with their first description of the killer, a description that would prove frustratingly inadequate in the decades-long manhunt. The methodology was evolving, but the signature elements remained consistent: binding, torture, and killing. Each crime scene revealed a killer growing more confident, more deliberate in his actions. The police found themselves facing an adversary who combined careful planning with sadistic pleasure, leaving few clues but maximum devastation. What made these initial murders particularly chilling was the killer's ability to move through the community undetected. He didn't target random victims. He chose them carefully, studied their habits, and struck when they were most vulnerable. His knowledge of security systems, gained through his employment at ADT, gave him an edge that would help him evade capture for years to come. These first murders established a pattern that would become BTK's trademark, a combination of methodical planning and sadistic execution that left investigators with few leads but horrifying crime scenes. The community began to realize they were dealing with someone who could be anyone: a neighbor, a coworker, a friend. As terror gripped Wichita, BTK's confidence grew. The murder of Shirley Vian Relford in 1977 demonstrated a killer who was refining his methods. He forced her children into a bathroom, blocking their escape with a mattress, a new level of cruelty that showed his evolving tactics. The children's terrified testimony added another layer of horror to an already frightening series of crimes. December 1977 brought the murder of Nancy Fox, marking a significant shift in BTK's behavior. For the first time, he called the police to report his own crime. The recorded call, played countless times over the years, captured the cold, deliberate voice of a killer who was beginning to crave attention. You will find a homicide at 843 South Pershing. This period saw BTK's first communications with the media. Letters, poems, and packages began arriving at local newspapers and television stations. He coined his own nickname, BTK, and demanded recognition for his crimes. These communications revealed a killer who was not just satisfied with murder, he wanted notoriety. The failed attempt on Anna Williams in 1979 showed another side of BTK. When she didn't return home as expected, he left evidence of his presence and later sent her a poem lamenting the missed opportunity. This incident demonstrated both his patience in stalking victims and his need to maintain control through communication. The community response during this period transformed Wichita. Home security system sales skyrocketed. Women traveled in groups. Neighbors watched each other's houses. The city learned to live with a level of fear that became part of daily life. Police resources were stretched thin as they responded to countless reports of suspicious activity. Law enforcement faced mounting pressure as BTK's communications became more frequent and taunting. Each letter, each poem, each package was analyzed for clues, but the killer remained elusive. His ability to move through the community undetected while maintaining regular communication with the media created an atmosphere of helplessness and fear. The sudden silence from BTK created a new kind of terror. Had he moved away? Was he dead? Or was he simply watching, planning his next move? This period of apparent inactivity forced investigators to re-examine every aspect of the case, leading to the formation of a specialized task force in 1984. The task force's work during this period was groundbreaking for its time. They utilized early computer databases to cross-reference potential suspects, analyzed blood types, and created psychological profiles. But despite these efforts, the killer's true identity remained hidden behind his carefully constructed facade of normalcy. During these years, Dennis Rader continued his life as a respected member of the community. He was active in his church, served as a Cub Scout leader, and maintained his marriage and family life. This double existence demonstrated his remarkable ability to compartmentalize his murderous impulses while maintaining a convincing appearance of normalcy. The investigation during this period faced numerous challenges. Without fresh crime scenes or new communications, investigators had to rely on re-examining old evidence with new techniques. The task force size gradually decreased as other crimes demanded attention, but a core group remained dedicated to solving the BTK cases. The community's fear never fully subsided during these years. Every unsolved murder brought whispers of BTK's possible return. Parents continued to warn their children, and women maintained their vigilance. The killer had succeeded in permanently altering the fabric of Wichita society. Law enforcement used this time to develop new investigative techniques. They created one of the first computer databases dedicated to tracking serial killers, established better communication between departments, and refined their understanding of criminal psychology. These advances would later prove crucial in solving other cases, even if BTK remained elusive. BTK's return shattered the fragile sense of security that had begun to develop in Wichita. The murder of Maureen Hedge in 1985 was particularly shocking. She lived just 6 houses away from Dennis Rader. The killer had literally been hiding in plain sight, serving as a church council member while committing horrific acts. The Hedge murder demonstrated BTK's evolution as a killer. He took her body to his church, Christ Lutheran, where he posed her for photographs in a macabre ritual that satisfied his need for documentation and control. His position as church council president gave him the access he needed to carry out these disturbing acts undetected. Vicky Wegerle's murder in 1986 showed another side of BTK's methodology. He posed as a telephone repairman to gain entry, using his knowledge of utilities and home security to appear legitimate. Her young son was present in the house during the murder, adding another layer of horror to the crime. During this period, other unsolved murders in the area complicated the investigation. Police had to determine which crimes were BTK's work and which were unrelated. This confusion helped the killer maintain his anonymity while continuing his reign of terror. The investigation faced new challenges during this time. Despite advances in forensic science, BTK's careful planning and knowledge of police procedures helped him avoid leaving crucial evidence. His understanding of law enforcement techniques, gained through his criminal justice education, made him an especially difficult target. These years also saw changes in BTK's personal life. His children were growing up, his career was advancing, and his standing in the community was stronger than ever. The contrast between his public persona and his secret life became even more pronounced, demonstrating his remarkable ability to maintain his dual existence. The murder of Dolores Davis in 1991 would prove to be BTK's last known killing, though no one knew it at the time. At 62, Davis represented an older victim than BTK's usual target, but the methodology remained consistent with his previous crimes. The level of planning and execution showed a killer at the height of his capabilities. This final murder demonstrated all the hallmarks of BTK's evolution as a killer. He used his Boy Scout leadership as an alibi, carefully planned the attack, and took the victim's body to multiple locations before finally leaving it under a bridge. The sophistication of his methods showed how he had refined his technique over the years. The investigation of Davis's murder revealed both the advances in forensic science and its limitations at the time. While investigators could collect more evidence than ever before, they still lacked the crucial connections that would lead them to Dennis Rader. The killer's knowledge of law enforcement procedures continued to serve him well. The community's response to this murder showed how BTK had permanently altered Wichita's sense of security. Even though this would be his last known victim, the fear he had instilled remained. Every unsolved crime brought whispers of his possible involvement, and his shadow continued to loom over the city. What makes this murder particularly significant is how it represented both an end and a beginning. While it was BTK's last known killing, it wouldn't be his last act of terror against the community. His later communications would prove that his need for attention and control remained undiminished. The Davis murder also marked a transition in BTK's life. His children were older, his career was established, and his position in the community was secure. Whether these factors contributed to the end of his killing spree remains a matter of speculation, but they demonstrate the complexity of his double life. During the very years he was terrorizing Wichita, Dennis Rader maintained a successful career that placed him in positions of authority and trust. His employment at ADT Security Systems from 1974 to 1988 gave him intimate knowledge of home security systems, knowledge he would use to devastating effect in his crimes. His transition to compliance officer for Park City in 1991 showed another facet of his personality, a need to exercise control over others through official channels. Neighbors reported his zealous enforcement of city codes, particularly his targeting of single women with repeated violations. This abuse of authority reflected the same need for control that drove his crimes. Rader's involvement in Christ Lutheran Church, where he served as congregation president, demonstrated his ability to maintain a respected position in the community while harboring his dark secrets. He used church keys to access the building for his disturbing post-murder rituals, showing how he exploited every position of trust he held. His family life presented the perfect cover. A wife, 2 children, a modest home, and regular church attendance created an image of suburban normalcy that helped deflect suspicion. Colleagues described him as detail-oriented and somewhat rigid, but these traits were seen as assets in his professional roles. BTK's return to public communication in 2004 marked the beginning of the end of his freedom. The 30th anniversary of the Otero murders prompted him to break his silence, sending a letter to the Wichita Eagle that included photos of Vicki Beggerl's body and her driver's license, proof that he was indeed the original BTK. His communications became increasingly frequent and elaborate. He sent puzzles, drawings, and detailed accounts of his crimes. This need for recognition, this desire to claim his place in criminal history, revealed a narcissism that would ultimately lead to his downfall. Each package, each letter, each word choice provided investigators with new insights into his personality. The technology that had advanced during his silence played a crucial role during this period. While BTK thought he was cleverly toying with police, each communication provided digital breadcrumbs that would eventually lead to his capture. His question about whether he could be traced through a floppy disk marked a turning point in the investigation. These communications revealed a killer who had never stopped thinking about his crimes. He had organized them into projects, maintained detailed records, and saved trophies from each murder. His meticulous nature, once an asset in avoiding capture, now provided evidence that would help convict him. The final phase of the BTK investigation showcased the evolution of forensic science and police work over 3 decades. When BTK asked if he could be traced through a floppy disk, investigators seized their opportunity. The disk he sent contained metadata that led police to Christ Lutheran Church and a user named Dennis. Surveillance of Dennis Rader began immediately. Investigators obtained DNA from his daughter's medical records, comparing it to evidence from the crime scenes. The familial DNA match provided the final piece of evidence they needed. Rader's arrest on February 25, 2005, was anticlimactic compared to his crimes. Pulled over in his SUV near his home, the man who had terrorized Wichita for decades surrendered without resistance. The search of his home revealed the true extent of his obsession: thousands of pages of documents, photographs, and tokens from his victims. The investigation had come full circle. The same attention to detail that had helped him evade capture for so long provided prosecutors with overwhelming evidence of his guilt. His meticulous records, intended to help him relive his crimes, instead documented them for prosecution. The legal process revealed the full extent of BTK's crimes through Rader's own words. His courtroom confession, delivered in a flat, emotionless tone, provided chilling details of each murder. He described his victims as projects, speaking about their deaths with a detachment that horrified even seasoned courtroom observers. On June 27, 2005, Dennis Rader pleaded guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder. His detailed confessions, spanning hours, demonstrated the same meticulous attention to detail that had characterized his crimes. He showed no remorse, instead treating the proceedings as an opportunity to finally claim public credit for his acts. The sentencing hearing in August 2005 gave victims' families their chance to confront the man who had caused them so much pain. The court sentenced him to 10 consecutive life terms, ensuring he would never leave prison. If you found this video informative, consider subscribe to our YouTube channel for more captivating videos like this.